Welcome everyone. We welcome everyone to the webinar organized by my CFO, a market leader in the CFO outsourcing industry. The topic of discussion today is Impact of Business Process Improvements on Efficiencies and Profits, a CFO's view. We have industry veteran Mr. S. Venkat, co-founder of my CFO, with us today to share his knowledge on the same. Venkat is the co-founder of my CFO, India's largest and fastest growing CFO services company. He leads the delivery function at my CFO, where he works with promoters and managements to improve valuations through good practices in the finance and accounts function. Over the last 3 years alone, Venkat has dealt with more than 200 companies. These companies come from different industry segments, stage of growth, revenue size, and ownership styles. Venkat has had the opportunity to work closely with promoter, investors, and heads of business departments on several ERP implementation and other business development projects. This experience gives Venkat a unique perspective on how companies can leverage a CFO's expertise. Over to you, Venkat.
The next in the series of webinars being conducted by my CFO. It was a pleasure to be with all of you last month, where we spoke about the importance of a CFO's role in investor relations. Today's discussion is going to be about how a CFO can lead and manage business process improvements so that the company can derive more efficiencies and the company can book higher profits. Like in the past, our webinars will last for around 40 to 45 minutes, following which we'll have a short Q&A session in case any of you have questions. We expect to wind up including the question and answer session by around 5 p.m. I thought what we would do today is to understand the role of a CFO, which is obviously evolved over a period of time. What used to be an accounting or a controllership role has now evolved to being a management analyst, a financial analyst, a chief risk officer role. A CFO is the chief conscience keeper of an organization, a chief commercial officer, and of course the subject which is that he is also a chief process officer. When we talk about process, you will note that we haven't titled this webinar as financial processes. We believe that a CFO should be playing a role in improving business processes and not just accounting and finance processes. How he can do it and why he should be doing it is what we'll be seeing later in this webinar. Good for us to open up with a case study. This is a company that my CFO has been recently involved in. It's been in the papers more prominently over the last 6 months or so. An e-commerce grocery store that has got more than 6,000 SKUs. So obviously very high in terms of stock keeping complexity, 45 different product categories with customers in both retail and corporate, and with 7 different modes of placing orders and making payments. Highly operations intensive, already highly IT enabled, 40% growth in revenues month on month. So we're not talking about 40% on an annual basis, this is 40% month on month. So obviously the company is scaling a big time. Already have 25% gross margins, yet there are several challenges. So what are the challenges? The challenges are in managing wastage and shrinkage across SKUs. There is an inability to measure stock turns by SKUs. Ultimately, this is a trading company. So how do you know that your funds are being efficiently utilized? There is an inability you check dumping by vendors. So your purchase order says something and your vendors are supplying something else, and operations is not able to necessarily stop the delivery that are coming in from the vendors. There is an inability to know what's selling in the market and what not. There are challenges in conducting physical counts of stock because the 6,000 items, it's a 24/7 operation. So the question is, how do you conduct a physical count? In other words, although the profit is good and the cash generation in the business is good, these are still suboptimal because the company believes that lots more can be done to tighten integration between operations and finance. A business process improvement exercise has got to be owned by the business. It's very hard to hold accountants alone responsible for a business process improvement. It's very important to assemble cross-functional teams. What we thought went well at this particular company is that there was extremely good coordination between both the finance teams and the operations teams of the process on the ground. Not only was the understanding at a very detailed or a granular level, the understanding was also shared, which means that operations, of course, should understand the operational specifics. But it's very important for finance to also not operate from a paradigm of theory. They cannot come up with bookish solutions. Finance teams need to work with businesses to obtain a very detailed understanding of the options. I'm not sure in our own companies how often the finance or the accountants actually visit the plant or visit the stores or visit a warehouse. It's important for finance teams to sit down with operations to really understand how specific processes work on the ground. There was very strong management support and drive. The most important thing that was done by this company and where we helped them was to really set up standards. The first thing you need to do in any kind of a business process improvement exercise is to understand how do you move from X to Y. But the first step starts by defining what is X. Where do you stand today? And most of us who are keen to see that processes improved don't always know what is the as-is scenario. That is, how are we performing on key metrics today? So one of the things we did is to set up a standard to say, what is the percentage of shrinkage and wastage in the business today? Okay, what is shrinkage? Shrinkage is things like, say, moisture loss. So if you got a vegetable that was a kilogram when the company actually acquired it, when it bought it from its vendor, because of moisture loss, that kilogram became 975 grams, so 25 grams has vanished because the water content in it has gone away. Or you look at wastage. When you're shipping 1,000 bottles of ketchup, how many bottles of ketchup do you tend to bake, right? Some percentage of shrinkage and wastage is inevitable in a trading business, particularly the kind of volumes that we're talking about. But do we know what percentage of shrinkage or wastage is an acceptable level of shrinkage or wastage? So when we commenced the exercise, we said, look, we don't know what the current level is, but let us set ourselves a standard. So we picked up a number, frankly, out of the air and said that, look, let's say that it is 5%. And over a period of time, we started measuring what is the shrinkage and wastage percentage, and we figured out that it was close to 5%. It was around 4.85%. And then the challenge was, how do you improve or reduce this percentage over a period of time? What we also did at this place is to obtain a very detailed understanding of the ABC categorization of the SKUs. When you're dealing with 6,000 items, it's important for you to be able to categorize what's important in terms of fast moving, what is high value, and what is less costly and less fast moving. Any project of this nature, which is complex and which is volume intensive, it's important to break it up into individual parts so that your own project management of the business process improvement is more manageable. So the understanding of the ABC categories by the finance team sitting along with the operations team allowed for a phased implementation of this technique. Did we stop only with the management or the team members or the business or the finance teams in this company? No. We also engage with key vendors because we recognize that today most of our companies cannot operate in silos. We are all heavily linked to our customers, to our vendors and other stakeholders. Sometimes it is essential that for a business process improvement, you also engage with your customers or vendors to see what changes they can make so that your life can be a little bit easier. And finally, we studied the methods of storage and material handling. Okay, for instance, if a piece of cabbage was being handled 5 times during its life cycle in this company, what we thought about is it possible that we can reduce that 5 times to 2 times? Because if you stop touching the cabbage 3 times, the possibility is that you're going to have less damage as compared to what you will do when you're touching it only 2 times. So the point that we're trying to make here through this case study is that when you make a business process improvement, understanding the specifics at a very, very granular level and making sure that the understanding is not just residing with the operations team, it should also, when I say operations, it can be your production teams, your purchase teams. It's not enough for that knowledge or intelligence to be residing with them. It needs to be shared with the finance team so that finance understands the business context in which they need to lead the process change. Ultimately, we all want to know what is the benefit, right? I mean, what's in it for me? So what happened to this company? What we figured is that the saving in this project is that the wastage reduced from 4.85% to 3.23%. So there was nearly a 1.5% saving. And this happened just within 4 weeks of the project getting started. So this is what we call as low-hanging fruits. Very important to get this because once you get a saving like this, it just acts like a huge energy boost to all the people working on the project. People say, wow, this is something that can be done. And it provides more stamina and energy to the teams to look at the next phase of the implementation. Over the next 16 weeks, another 4 months, we were able to reduce the wastage by another 1 percentage point. So a total of 2.5% improvement in bottom line was achieved by this company in a matter of 4 months. Similarly, the average stock turns, which is 53, so already it's at a very high level because it's a trading company, it deals a lot of perishable and commodities, so the stock turns are very high. But we were able to increase the stock turns from an already high level of 53 to around 60, which reduced the working capital deployment and therefore the interest cost by close to around 80%. So what are some other examples of business process improvements? One could be all of us deal with sales pipelines. We all have to sell to survive. Most of us would argue that it's probably the most important department at the company. So moving a sales pipeline management from a manual Excel spreadsheet, I'm sure all of you must be having at least an Excel spreadsheet to measure your sales pipeline. How do you move it from a manual mode to a CRM mode? What's a CRM? It's a customer relationship management software. The benefits are that you can do a better metric of your sales pipeline quality and volume. Similarly, all of us have got files and we all know how tough it can be to retrieve a document from a file. In most of our offices, if our peon or the office boy is missing or your secretary is missing, it's almost impossible for you to retrieve any document. We are now seeing several companies who are smartly moving on to an e-mode to file and retrieve documents. It makes it easier, first of all, to share information with multiple departments. Therefore, it's also easier for more people to retrieve it. But most importantly, today's solutions, and I'm going to speak a little bit about this later in the webinar, it is possible for you, if you scan document, to actually read content from that document and use that content into Excel or some other business intelligence tool. So it is possible for you to take editable text from an image and manipulate it in a way that you can integrate it with some other process. right? So for example, let's take a simple example of say an export-import documentation, and we know the number of papers that get exchanged when there is an import or an export transaction. There will always be a leg on forex management. There will be a leg on the trade management itself in terms of the bill of entry. That could be a bill of lading. There may be insurance that is connected with this. There will be some transportation. There will be your clearing and forwarding agents' bills that are connected with it. There is a customs duty calculation. So there are several things that are dependent on this set of documents. Now, many of the companies that we deal with have got manual bill of entries. Now, if you can scan this bill of entry and you have a solution that can actually read the bill of entry number, read the date, read the port of dispatch, the port of arrival, the same information can actually be used by your purchase folks as a part of the purchase process. So there is no need for us to have this in manual mode where only the import-export documentation department is sitting on it. The purchase does not have access. These kind of issues actually be resolved very quickly. Also, typically, you go and ask a purchase number from the import team, and you ask it from the purchase team, you're likely to get two different numbers. Or you talk to the finance team, you're likely to get maybe a third number. The benefit of putting everything in E mode is that there is something called single stream data reporting, which is that everybody is using data that has been entered only once in the system. So if you scanned it once and you captured the information, is it possible that all departments who are using the same piece of data are not maintaining independent sets of data, but they're all sharing the same piece of information? Another example of a business process improvement could be something as simple as defining a schedule of authority. Okay, many of our companies don't have this. What should a CFO do? He should be asking a very fundamental question on who will initiate what transaction, who will approve that transaction, who will vet the transaction or check the transaction, and who's allowed to make a commitment for a particular expense. Now, of course, you can slice and dice this in many ways. You can say CapEx, there is somebody different. There is revenue expense, there is somebody different. You could put a monetary cutoff saying CapEx below 1 lakh will go to somebody, CapEx above 1 lakh goes to somebody. But many of our companies lack something as basic as this. Even in cases where there are smaller companies where a promoter approves all decisions, it is still useful to have a schedule of authority, because for understanding the document flow from one department to another, it is important to define who will initiate, who will approve, who will check, and who will commit. And a lot of these processes are not actually done by promoters. I can understand promoters approving an expense and signing off on a check, but what about the other processes? So think about a schedule of authority. You could have a manual schedule of authority. Even better is to try and implement a schedule of authority in an E mode, usually through an ERP. The other example of business process improvement can be to define and then to continually benchmark with standards. Okay, a very fundamental question to which we very rarely get an answer is, what is the expectation from a process, right? So for example, if it is something like a vendor payment processing, okay, is there a standard that can say that if there is a vendor invoice that comes into a company, who is supposed to approve it in how much time? Okay, so if the purchase department is supposed to approve, can we determine a TAT to say that the purchase department should approve it within 72 hours, finance will pay it within X number of days of receipt from purchase department? Or it could be a quality claim that you need to bring back for your vendor. What is the process to make sure that once you get the QC report, how quickly is the purchase department supposed to go back to the vendor to say that there is a quality claim and therefore we're going to make a debit note on you? Every process, for it to improve, needs to be defined in terms of what is the output from the process and what is the turnaround time. What is the expectation from that particular process? Once you define this, then it is possible to measure the improvement over a period of time. Of course, the examples of business process improvements are several, so I'm sure that each of our companies in our own context can think about what are those processes that can be improved. In fact, a strong recommendation from my side is that you should be looking to work with your CFO as a part of the budgeting exercise, or if not, maybe at least a quarterly planning exercise, to say, let's pick 3 business processes, and there should be some specific initiatives that we pick up for improvement. So we not only say that we're going to define the process, but let's say that we're going to actually implement the improvement. so that we can derive some value out of today's webinar. So that's a good to-do action to carry away from this webinar, to engage with the CFO. Let's mutually agree with our CFOs that these are the 3 things we will do, let's say by end of December. What are those 3 improvements in my company that can give me the maximum benefit? Let's go after the low-hanging fruit first. So in today's webinar, we want to look at 5 sections. Okay, so what are the 5 ways in which process improvements typically impact profit? What are the 5 practical, simple, and effective, but also very inexpensive tools that we can implement in our company? So I want to leave you with some tools at the end of this webinar to implement. 5 things we should not be doing while implementing process change. So what are the don'ts? 5 things that we need to do to get hold of buy-in, because process change is not an individual's effort, it's a team. So how do you get a buy-in? And finally, 5 misconceptions about process improvements. What are the 5 most misunderstood things about a process improvement? This is what we're going to see over the next 25 minutes or so. So what are the 5 ways in which process improvement impacts profit? Firstly, a process improvement ensures repeatability. So when you do a process, the way to pick a process for improvement is something where you're reinventing the wheel every time. So you're recreating something all the time, and each time is a different time. Those processes should be picked first. Whatever you can routinize, you must try and routinize. So they call it a cookie cutter approach, right? So what does a cookie cutter mean? Is that you find the solution once, and then you just keep cutting the solution every time without any having to think about it. The thought process has to go in defining the process. Once you define it, then it should be a cookie cutter. What does repeatability do? It reduces time, because the first time you do it, maybe it's your operator 5 minutes to do a particular task. The next time she does it, that 5 minutes becomes 4.5. Over a period of time, you will find that the 5 minutes can be done actually in 2.5 minutes or even 2 minutes. So it reduces time. So putting a process in place, defining a process, some of us may say, I don't have the time to define a process, I don't have time to document a process. I know it's not a very sexy thing to do, to try and write down a process note, but believe me, the time that you will be spending in defining this is really time well spent. The reason is because it's going to reduce a lot of time going forward. What is not visible to us is the time that our teams are spending in doing the same task in a different way each time. That has got a cost to the company. The problem is that that cost is intangible, so we don't recognize what that cost is. So process improvements help in improving repeatability, which reduces time, it reduces errors, it improves quality because you're doing it day in and day out, so the person concerned is kind of getting better and better at it, reducing the number of errors. The second way in which process improvement helps is through single stream data entry, and we touched a little bit on this. The principle is that data should be entered once in the company by any one person. Okay, now it could be that different people are entering data for different parts of the organization, which is okay, right? So a purchase guy could be entering purchase data, sales guy does sales data, and so on. But once a sales data is entered, there cannot be a second person entering the sales data. Single stream data entry again reduces time, it improves shared visibility, and it does away with the reconciliations, because one of the biggest challenges I find promoters really tearing their hair out is to find out which department is giving you the right number, and that's not a good conversation to be having in any company. Integration is the third benefit of process improvement. The reason is that no process improvement can be done in a department. You typically find that it requires teamwork with multiple departments, which is good. As promoters, we should be encouraging this process because it pushes people to understanding the work of another department well. And the benefit of understanding the other department's work is not restricted only to this process. It can also be useful for the next process. It just helps in a general improvement in awareness among different people in the organization, which goes a long way in improving efficiencies. Process improvement also cascades responsibility. Why? Because stuff that you are doing today as a promoter, what you are doing as a CFO, you are able to push it down to somebody who is junior. So it frees up senior management time. So you become free now to take strategic calls rather than trying to work on an ad hoc basis because of the lack of a process. And finally, the company becomes scale ready. Why is that? Because once you have made several of your processes routine, it improves the company's own bandwidth to be able to take on higher volume. It could be higher production volumes, it could be higher sales orders, it could be higher number of people, whatever is the key metric that you have in your business, your company collectively has got more bandwidth to be able to deal with scale. Your company is also more capable of absorbing change because you have mastered the art of taking a process, and you start to become better at this, where you take a process, routinize it, move on. Right? So once you have done this across the organization, you just be very good at picking up a new process and understanding how to routinize it faster. Some tools that we have to make life simple. So on the customer relationship management, and I must just give you a disclaimer, we don't have a special understanding or any kind of commissions from any of the companies that we have put down over here. We have had a chance to probably work with 150, 200 companies now. Many of these cases, at least 100 plus of these companies, we have had a chance to implement some system or the other, some process improvement or the other. And over a period of time, they kind of understood that there are certain types of companies that are probably better, okay, at developing tools that are good for the mid-corporate, okay, which is really, our segment, the segment that all of you are from. Our experience has been that Indian IT vendors, I think, understand the psyche of the Indian mid-corporate, and they have provided solutions that are simple but not simplistic, right? Because business in India is complex. I mean, we all have to accept that. But some of these IT vendors have done a good job of bringing what is actually complex processes. They have tried to put it in a form that's quite simple and intuitive to use. Okay, so one of the things that we thought about before putting some of the names here on this slide is to look at ease of implementation, because whatever IT tool you employ, it's, you may understand it, but the change on the ground will not happen unless your team also understands it. So one very important filter that we applied is that the product has got to be sundar, it's got to be sasta, it has got to be tikau, right? So sundar in the sense it's got to have the right features. When I say sasta, it's not cheap, it's got to be value for money. It should demonstrate payback to you in a very quick way. Right? And of course, it's got to be tikau, it's got to be robust, it should stand the test of time. So none of the companies that we put here are fly-by-night operators. So on CRM, we have liked to work with Zoho quite successfully. Salesforce, of course, is an overseas company, but again, very flexible CRM. On ERP, we have worked with multiple IT solution providers, but Ramco and TCS Aon may be good options for you to consider. On project management, again, Zoho has got a fairly robust tool for project management. And on document management and process flows, which was what I was talking to you about, as to how you can pull out some of the fields, editable text fields, out of what is essentially a scanned image or from a PDF file. Open text, BMS, and SCOT are solutions that you could be looking at. So what are the 5 things that we can do to get buy-in from our teams? Okay, very important to involve people up front. A lot of times, I think promoters make the mistake of doing all the designing in their head, and then they call a meeting to say that this is what I have thought of doing, now all of you go out and do it. Okay, so that's one approach. The second approach is for the promoter and the CFO to sit down together and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. They design the whole thing, and then go out there to the other department heads and tell them, okay, now let's go out and implement this. I think both these approaches are somewhat risky approaches, right? Because what we figured out is you can't separate process improvements from change management on the people side, right? You got to deal with people. People are a package. They may be loyal, they may be very capable, but I just think that 90% of the human beings that we work with in our companies somehow are not able to evolve over a period of time in terms of their thought processes. So change is tough to implement on the ground. It looks conceptually easy, but by the time you finish implementing it on the ground, it can be quite a tiring exercise. Not in all companies, in many of our companies. So try and involve people as a part of the design phase. It's important that HODs, the business side folks, the guys on the ground who are going to be dealing with the new process, they understand that this process is not something that's being thrust from the top. This is their process, right? So you got to bring them in as a part of the design phase so that they think that this is their process and they go out and implement it. That way the buy-in is much better rather than it's being thrust from the top. You also got to address the question of what's in it for me, right? So why should the guy on the ground who's making the process change do the process change? There has got to be some communication of how it's going to improve his life. Okay, now you have to understand that the process change is going to help the company in some way. But at an operational level, it's important to address the question as to what's in it for me. Now I've got to tell you that not in all cases will you be able to answer this question. So we've got several companies that have gone, say, from an ERP, from a Tally into an ERP, and an accountant will typically come back and tell you that, look, sir, in Tally I could do an entry in half a minute. Now in the ERP, it takes me 10 minutes to do an entry. So why should I do this entry? Right? So I recognize that there are some limitations to this approach. Sometimes there are just larger organizational objectives, okay, and individuals will have to just subsume their interests and just follow the organizational directive. But even in those cases, I think it's important to communicate to that guy on the ground as to what is the benefit that the company is deriving. What is the impact of his change on the organization or on the life of somebody else? It's a communication process that's very important for the leadership to lead. This is not something that can be delegated to HR or IT or finance. I think the CEO or the promoter needs to engage very tightly with people in the organization to answer the question of what's in it for them. Define the cost-benefit analysis in tangible terms, right? So this, for me, is a key CFO action. A CFO, before he implements any kind of a process or before he suggests a process to be changed or improved, either to the promoters or to another department head, must conduct a cost-benefit analysis of his own, right? And when we say cost, it is not just in terms of money. It's also in terms of management time. Let's not forget that the most expensive thing that goes into any change management, goes into any process improvement, is management time, right? So if you take management time plus the actual monetary cost of a process improvement, how does that stack up against the benefit, right? Don't go after any project that gives you a payback of more than 6 to 9 months. In most cases, you should get a payback in 9 months' time, worst case. If it is beyond 9 months, then I think you're probably not looking at the right projects. For a company that does not have a culture of process improvement, it's very important to go after the easy wins, go after the low-hanging fruit. Look at projects that have got a short payback. Why? When you do short payback projects, it allows you to showcase wins. It allows you to get people's buy-in faster. It infuses the organization. It improves your ability to do even bigger initiatives going forward. So don't go after what is nice to have. Do what is essential today. Run a pilot. Extremely important. Okay, they say that don't try and eat the elephant. You got to try and cut it into pieces and then only eat it. So process changes are like that. Don't try and do everything at the same time, right? Even in our client, when we did the 6,000 SKUs, we started with 20 SKUs as a pilot. Why? Because no matter how smart we all are, there is nothing like experience on the ground. We run a pilot with 20. We see how the organization is responding to it, how the processes are behaving. Are people doing what they're expected to do? Did we think about everything, or based on the 20 out of 6,000, we are seeing that, hey, look, there are 2 or 3 angles that we missed, which we should be implementing on the next 100. Okay, so you do your small pilot in order to test the ground so that you've got more confidence when you take on the whole project. You run a pilot so that you can showcase a small success very soon. Show your team a small success so that they understand how this works. A lot of times there are debates, and sometimes the debates can be extremely tiring, go on forever, because different people in the room, especially if they come from different functions, they can't agree on what is the right way. So firstly, it's very difficult for everybody to agree on one process. But even if they agree on process, they may not be able to agree on how to go about doing this process. So there are 2 ways to look at this. One is to say that we will keep debating till the time we get clarity. The other way is to say, what are the common points on which all of us have got consensus? Let us do that as a pilot. And when we do that, okay, we will work out the next step over there, right? Sometimes they say success is right around the next bend, right? And we can do debate about, how we're going to get successful. let's move up to the next bend, and then you will figure out the way from there. As long as there's a game plan behind this, doing it incrementally is not a bad idea at all, right? So let's get believers in the company. Before we seek to convert anyone, they got to firstly believe in what you're doing. So try and run a pilot as a way of getting people's buy-in. Also, let's be the change that we want to see in the company. And okay, this, I've got to tell you, sometimes both CFOs and promoters can be guilty about it, because it's almost that they want to change, but the change has got to be done by somebody else. Very rarely will that kind of a change ever be sustainable in a company. The change has got to begin over here. It's got to be within us, right? So the person who is leading the change management process, which has got to be someone senior, like either the promoter, the CEO, or the CFO, he himself has got to be seen as making a change. If we are going to lead our lives exactly the way we were leading it before the process change, why would anybody do this? You know, so a little classic example, right? I mean, we all want ERPs to be implemented. How often do promoters themselves undergo an ERP training? How often do they say that, look, I will do my approvals on the ERP? I know some of us are doing it, but I'm just asking a question as to whether we are mentally open to leading the change by setting the right example. Okay, so the first thing, so fundamental principle, and maybe I should have put this as a first bullet, is that if we are not seen as making a change ourselves, it's very hard to implement any kind of a process change within the company, right? So if it is not a company-wide initiative, if it's a department initiative, make sure that the department head is making a change, right? So we may say that the department head sometimes are elderly people, and they could be saying, oh, it's very, very important for everybody to use the ERP or use email systems, but he himself will get a printout on which he will put his approval. Okay, very hard to sustain those kind of process changes, right? Because you know these individuals, the heads of departments, are going to be the first people to embrace change. Very important to demonstrate this behavior on the ground if you want to get the buy-in of your team. Finally, what are the 5 misconceptions about process improvements? Okay, so the one thing that we hear quite a lot is all process improvements are about IT implementations. I don't agree. I think there are a lot of things that we can do in manual mode even before we think about an IT project. Sometimes, you know, the conditions, the way it goes on in board meetings or in senior management meetings, is to say that, yeah, IT tool laga do, sab problem khatam ho jayega aapka. Okay, nothing will change. Believe me. Process improvement, business process improvement is about discipline, right? And no IT tool is a magic wand that can substitute discipline. Whether you do it in manual mode or IT mode, discipline is a non-negotiable item. So you need to be able to try out or be open to manual improvements even before you go into IT improvements. And I'm not suggesting that manual is a compulsory step. All I'm saying is that if you're not sure about what is the discipline level of this organization, try out a manual mode for some time. Okay, so where, let's say you don't have anything for tracking your sales pipeline, try and not only put an Excel in place for your sales pipeline, but also get into a weekly review call. If you're confident that the weekly reviews are happening right on a week-to-week basis, say for 12 weeks at a go, and you are able to improve the format, okay, that we're using for the CRM monitoring, and you're able to get better quality intelligence about your sales process, then you know that you're ready to take the next leap. What this also does, it helps you to think about what features you require in your IT tool. Otherwise, if you're going to go straight from no process into an IT process, there's a risk that you'll buy a product which is probably not meeting your requirement. So there are a lot of merits in actually even doing manual improvements. Important thing is that it is not key whether it's a manual tool or an IT tool. Important thing is that there should be a benefit to the company at the end of the day. So any improvement is an improvement, it's a good improvement, let's take it. There are a lot of things that companies can do in manual mode even before they consider IT options. The second misconception is that IT tools are expensive. Okay, again we find that what is grossly underestimated, okay, is not the cost of the tool. Okay, people normally have got budgets to buy these tools. Usually people think it's expensive, so they budget more. What people don't budget enough of is management time. Okay, IT tools are no longer expensive. In many cases, they are very functional, very flexible, very inexpensive products. You should know what you're looking for. talk to people, shop around, you will find that there are some very good deals going on in the market. A lot of these products are now available on the cloud, so you don't need to maintain expensive server infrastructure. You don't need to worry about backups. You don't need to worry about security in most of these cases. A lot of these IT tools are pay as you use, so it's an OpEx model. You can start in a small way with one license, try it out for a month, get one or two people in the organization to be completely comfortable with the tool, and once that is in place, then you can always scale it up by buying more licenses or subscribing to more licenses from the next month. Right? It's very easy to use. You're not kind of getting into a long-term commitment. You don't like the product, switch it off, stop paying. Right? So IT is no longer a capex item. So most of the companies that we work with, CFOs have got to see how you can make this an OpEx item, and I think IT costs are only coming down, whether it's storage or it's bandwidth or it's security, and also for IT products. The third misconception people have is people will not change. Okay, so a lot of promoters we talk to, they say, look, what you're saying makes a lot of sense, but my team will not change. Okay, I think it's a slightly simple view of starting any kind of a change management exercise. A lot of times people don't want to change because earlier initiatives on process improvements have not been managed well. Okay, demonstrate to them why this time is different, right? Make sure that you succeed once. It just creates an environment in which you can go back to a virtuous cycle. Okay, so people do change. It depends on how we appeal to them. It depends on whether they see the benefit and why they should be changing or not. Improvements are not quantifiable is the other argument that we hear quite a lot. Not necessarily true. I think we all need to get more innovative and to get it, of course, that some improvements are quantifiable and some are not. But let's not look everything through the glass of a monetary improvement. Right? There could also be a service level improvement. Like your turnaround time, for example, is something that can be measured. So we've got to get innovative about how we measure improvements, and let's not look at this only through the lens of monetary. Most improvements in my view are actually quantifiable. Right? The last thing, again, we hear quite a lot of is to say that process improvements work for other companies, but not mine, because my business model is unique. Okay, and the more companies we see, I've got to tell you that process change has got nothing to do with your business model. It's really got to do with whether we have the mental strength and the discipline, the will to drive through the change, the will to take people along. I think those are far more critical ingredients in implementing a successful business process change as compared to the uniqueness of your business model. Most of us like to think we're unique, but in reality, as far as I'm not disputing it, there will be some unique features about a lot of businesses in terms of the way cash flows works, profitability works, working capital cycle works, etc. But from a change management standpoint, from a business improvement standpoint, there isn't really that much that kind of distinguishes one company from another. Different companies have got different capabilities to make business process improvements. Okay, but as I said earlier, the capability itself is not a constraining factor. It is a discipline and the will that tends to be a constraining factor, right? So I guess that was the last slide that I wanted to share with you. And at this point, we are about 45 to 50 minutes into the webinar. So if there are any questions, we'll be very happy to take them.
Thank you so much, Venkat, for the insightful details. I thank everyone who participated in our webinar. In case of any questions that have not been answered or any separate conversation that you would want to have, we request you to mail it to the email ID which was provided at the end of the slide. Thank you so much.